Hi, I'm Nicholas, the author of A Chemical Mind on Substack. This is the first of what I hope will be an ongoing series of special podcast interviews with great scientists and science communicators. And to start us off, I had the absolute privilege to interview the great and prolific Dr. Paul Offit. He's a professor of vaccinology and pediatrics at the University of Pennsylvania and a member of the FDA Vaccines Committee, founding member of Autism Science Foundation, formerly on the CDC Immunization Committee. He's also the co-inventor of a vaccine against rotavirus. He's a prolific author of books on science, medicine, and a great debunker of misinformation. And his latest book is Tell Me When It's Over, all about COVID-19 topics. I've edited out some of my waffling moments. I'm clearly lacking in practice, and he's a personal hero of mine, so I was supremely nervous. And I've cut out some of the time lag of being on the other side of the world from each other. I've also asked him questions sent in by subscribers on the Substack chat thread, so stick around for those, as well as a few shout-outs. If you enjoyed this, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share it around. Without further ado, let's get on with the show. I'm here with Dr. Paul Offit. It is an absolute pleasure, and it's an honor to be able to get to talk with you. So thank you so much for doing this with us.
It's my pleasure. Look forward to it.
So you've been and done a lot of things. You are the professor of vaccinology and pediatrics at the Perelman School of Medicine and University of Pennsylvania. But you've also been on the FDA and the CDC, and you're a founding member of the Autism Science Foundation, and you've done so many papers and books, and you even created a vaccine. My goodness. Sort of what inspired you to take on misinformation, especially health misinformation and vaccine misinformation?
I think the first thing was I was on the advisory committee for immunization practices to the CDC. I came on like in 1998 and was on for 5 years or so. And that was a rough time for vaccines. I mean, there was sort of like the big 1, 2, 3 hit. One is in 1998, Andrew Wakefield published a paper in The Lancet claiming that the combination of measles, mumps, rubella, or MMR vaccine caused autism, which wasn't a study. It was just a case series of 8 children. He might as well have published a study showing 8 children who developed, signs and symptoms of autism within a month of eating a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I mean, it didn't make biological sense, nor did he offer biological sense. And nonetheless, it was published in arguably one of the oldest and best respected medical journals in the world, The Lancet. And it set off a firestorm. There was many people in the United Kingdom that chose not to vaccinate their children. There were a lot of children who were hospitalized, and there were 4 children who died from measles, really because of that paper. Then it spread across the Atlantic Ocean to the United States, and thousands and thousands of parents chose not to give that vaccine in order to avoid autism, which made no sense. Even at the ACIP, we were asked to vote on whether or not that vaccine should be divided into its 3 component parts, because that's what Andrew Wakefield said. He said that because you're giving it as one vaccine, that's overwhelming the immune system. And if you divided it up, you could avoid autism. So there was a congressman named Dave Weldon from Florida who was on the Appropriations Committee. The CDC, like all government agencies, gets money from the Appropriations Committee. And he was a friend of Andrew Wakefield. And he asked us to actually vote on this ridiculous notion, which basically means they win, because then the paper says the CDC was debating this like it was in any sense debatable. So that was number one. And then Rotavirus Shield was a vaccine, a simian human rotavirus reassortant vaccine that was on the market for about 10 months before it was withdrawn because of an issue of safety, which was really the first time a vaccine had been withdrawn for an issue of safety since the Qatar incident, in the mid-50s, when a polio vaccine was made badly. And so that scared people because it had been routinely recommended to be given to all children at less than 6 months of age. And then you had thimerosal, this ethyl mercury containing preservative in vaccines that basically the Public Health Service put a gun to the head of the pharmaceutical industry and said, you've got to take this out, even though all the evidence to that point was that at the level contained in vaccines, it wasn't harmful, which is what they said, by the way, in the American Academy of Pediatrics missive. It said, all the evidence is that thimerosal at the level contained in vaccines is safe, but to
Mhm.
make vaccines even safer, we're going to ask to take it out. Well, if it was safe, then why taking it out doesn't make it safer? So I think what struck me in that was that although the pediatricians were good, I mean, they got out there and they say, vaccines are good, vaccine preventable diseases are bad, we vaccinate our own children. I didn't see any scientists standing up and saying, this doesn't make a whit of biological sense in terms of thimerosal and the MMR story. And so that's why we created the Vaccine Education Center at Children's Hospital Philadelphia. That's why I wrote the book, Autism's False Prophets, and then later Deadly Choices and Bad Advice, and a variety of books that I think take on this notion of how we perceive science.
Your points about the whole separating out into the separate measles, mumps, and then rubella vaccines. Andrew Wakefield actually patented his own measles vaccine. I think it was the measles vaccine, and he did this 2 years before his paper came out. And so he was essentially setting up a whole scheme to, cause pressure to be placed on governments to separate the vaccine into its three parts by saying, this ingredient is dangerous, and oh, here's a vaccine I've prepared earlier that's safer. You should buy it from me, right?
Right. And in addition, of the 8 children who he described in that paper, 5 of them were in the midst of suing pharmaceutical companies. And he got money, roughly the equivalent of 800,000 US dollars, to basically launder legal claims through a medical journal, which is also a conflict. I mean, eventually those conflicts became clear. He also, frankly, misrepresented biological data. He misrepresented clinical data. And then I think by 2010, that paper was retracted. You really got to work hard to get your paper retracted. I mean, there's a lot of bad science published out there every day. You have to really not only be wrong, but frankly fraudulent and wrong, which is what he was.
And yeah, it's amazing, how long it took for that paper to be retracted. It took quite some time for an entire investigation to go through. But by 2010, the writing was really on the wall. It really was a surprise just how much effort it required before that thing was formally retracted. I myself have autism spectrum disorder. Both my kids have autism spectrum disorder as well, and I still hear to this day, continuing claims stating, but the vaccines probably did it, and yeah, it's remarkable. Even when the science is just demonstrated to be so clearly fraudulent, that these things still seem to come up. What is it going to take, I guess, for honest science and science-based medicine to continue to push back against these claims, and how do we help people to know who to trust as well?
That's a really good, that's a seminal question. That's the hardest question, who to trust. I mean, Andrew Wakefield was an accomplished researcher. He was smart. He did interesting work on sort of the basis of Crohn's disease and intestinal disease, showing that it was in part of vasculitis. That was breakthrough work. He was a smart guy, well spoken, published previously on Crohn's disease, and so he was an expert in many ways. So when he says it, that means something, and that to me is really interesting, because we're fighting that in this country now. If you have people like, there's a Congress person named Marjorie Taylor Greene, who believe that the Jewish people created space lasers that cause California wildfires. I mean, that the shootings in Sandy Hook and Las Vegas were just staged. I mean, so she's a little bit of a nut, and so she's not really trustworthy. I feel the same way about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. He's a lawyer who's basically a conspiracy theorist, but it's the people like Robert Malone, who's a brilliant guy, did important work on mRNA back in the late 1980s. I mean, he arguably could have been in line for the Nobel Prize for the work he did on mRNA. And yet there he is in front of Congress saying that this vaccine, these COVID vaccines, could cause cancer, and without any evidence. So these are the people I worry about. It's the one who are credentialed and accomplished that then get up. Peter McCullough is another one. I mean, he's a cardiologist who I think was chief of cardiologists at a Midwestern hospital, and he gets up there and says, the COVID vaccine spike protein is dangerous. And he, by the way, just to your point, he also says like sells COVID rescue kits, which include ivermectin and hydrochloroquine. So
Yes, of course he does.
So he can
Um,
save you.
this seems to be a really fascinating phenomenon. It's documented and written about. You mentioned it in one of your books as well, Pandora's Lab, Nobelitis, where sometimes you get a legitimate Nobel Prize winner, who goes and decides that, and because they've had such a history of being right, that they've had a lot of success in their career, that they decide that they're infallible, and once they come up with a pet theory that turns out to be wrong, they can't accept that. Uh, and there's been quite a few examples of this, haven't there?
Sure, there are four Nobel Prize winners who believe that blacks were genetically inferior to whites, including James Watson of Watson and Crick, who
Mm,
figured out the structure of DNA.
mm.
Or Shockley, who one of the co-inventors of the transistor. And they never backed down, no matter how much evidence showed that that wasn't true. They never backed down because, and why? I don't know. I mean, it may be that it's narcissism or omnipotence or omniscience or um, whatever, because it's hard to win a Nobel Prize. I mean, you have to sort of work hard to get there,
I
and
have
I
heard
think when you're
it's a
there,
real challenge. Yeah.
it's hard. And so you think you're just always right. Linus Pauling, who believed
Mm.
vitamin C not only could prevent or cure colds, but could prevent or cure cancer. And when study after study showed he was wrong, he still didn't back off that. And I mean, I think when you do something like discover the alpha helical structure of proteins like Linus Pauling did, and when people are sort of saying, well, that doesn't make sense, that it would look like this kind of spiral staircase or corkscrew, and you prove them right through these X-ray diffraction studies, you believe you're just right about everything,
Yeah.
and I think that because we're often taken in by these people. You have AIDS denialists, who believe that HIV was created by the CIA. I mean, Nobel Prize winners like when Gary Mathai or Kary Mullis. I mean, they believe that. It means Kary Mullis, the inventor of PCR.
And yeah, and this is the thing as well. One of the things that I've done a little bit of writing about so far, which is that sometimes really smart people can come up with these ideas and theories, or can back and support ideas and theories that are just outside of biological reality or physical reality. And it's hard. It's especially hard to combat that, because it means that it's a kind of a demonstration of why you can't just sort of trust on faith any authority figure, just because they have a Nobel Prize. I mean, you can take what they say seriously, but you can't take it on face value. And especially for lay people. I mean, I myself, I'm a lay person, but I read a lot of Wikipedia. Being a layperson, it is hard to really nail down. Okay, is what I'm reading really sensible? Andrew Wakefield's paper, before it was retracted, say, if I had read that before it was retracted, and when it first came out, I could very easily have been taken in.
For sure. I think it asks a lot of lay people. I mean, you want to trust experts. And the question is, how do you know who to trust when
Mm.
people really are experts? You take, for example, somebody like Joseph Ladapo, who's the Florida State Surgeon General. He has an
Mm.
MD, PhD from Harvard. Oh, that's a good school. It's not Penn, but it's a good school. And
It's
sorry,
not
that was a
bad.
joke. And here he is sending a letter to every healthcare worker in Florida saying that the mRNA vaccines are contaminated with fragments of DNA that are going to insert themselves into your DNA and cause cancer and autoimmune diseases and a variety of other diseases, when that patently is just false. First of all, we're exposed to foreign DNA all the time. Assuming you live on this planet and eat anything made from animals or vegetables, you are going to ingest foreign DNA, some of which will end up in your circulation. I mean,
Mhm.
you have mechanisms in your cytoplasm to recognize and destroy foreign DNA. That DNA doesn't have a nuclear access signal, so it's never going to get into the nucleus. Even if it got into the nucleus, it doesn't have an integrase to be able to insert itself into your DNA. So it's just nonsense, utter nonsense. And frankly, any vaccine that's made from cells is a starting material, like because viruses grow in cells, and that's how you make your vaccine: measles vaccine, mumps vaccine, rubella vaccine. rotavirus vaccine, any of these vaccines, are going to have fragments of DNA at levels in the sort of picogram level, which is not in any sense harmful.
Yeah.
But it sounds bad, right? Foreign DNA, that can't be good, right? Although it's always interesting to me that people never think can make you smarter, or make you have superpowers.
Yeah, that's right.
Why not give it,
It's like it's never got a positive attribute. And there's a lot of that emotive
yeah,
language, isn't there? A lot of questions, came out when it was announced that there was an mRNA vaccine. Oh, mRNA, that's genetic code. It's kind of like it's kind of like with that old prank, dihydrogen monoxide. Dihydrogen monoxide is a dangerous chemical because if you breathe it in, you'll die, but it's water. Of course, if you breathe it in, you'll die. It's when you change the language, you can create a narrative, positive or negative. I think when people were talking about 5G spreading COVID, my wife and I would often joke with each other, after we got the vaccine, it's like, oh, my 5G reception is really good right now. I'm really, really glad that Bill Gates was able to give us better 5G.
Right now, if you ever saw the Penn and Teller are comedians in the United States
Yes.
who did a thing on dihydroxy monoxide where they went to a California state fair and they had a petition and they never lied. They said that they're looking to ban dihydroxy monoxide from the face of the earth. And they said, it's in the water we drink. As a result, it's in our urine. It's in our tears. And, and we just have to get it out of there. And so they got 300 people basically to sign a petition to ban water from the face of the earth by using its chemical name.
And that just will never cease to blow my mind. So you talk about choices between risks. And I think this makes a lot of sense, especially in the context of vaccines, because nothing, not even water, has absolutely zero risk. But there's a choice. You can either drink water and continue to live, or you can choose not to drink water, ban it from the face of the earth, and you will probably die in about 3 or 4 days. Those are very different risks. If you're only ever hearing about the risks of, say, inhaling water and or things like that, it can be easy to fall into the trap of thinking, oh well, there's so much negative around that choice.
No, and I think that's right. But I think we rate those risks differently at some level. That we rate the risk of something that we do that ends up in harm as being different than the risk that comes with not doing something. I mean, I just don't think we see it the same way. That a choice not to get a vaccine, for example, is a choice, and it's not a risk-free choice. And so, if, for example, you get a vaccine, you get an mRNA vaccine, and you develop myocarditis, which happened at a rate for males between 16 and 29 at a rate of roughly 1 per 6,600, so not that rare. That generally myocarditis or inflammation of the heart muscle was short-lived and temporary and self-resolving, but nonetheless, it was you're basically having an inflammatory reaction against your heart. But if you choose not to get a vaccine and you get COVID, the incidence of myocarditis with COVID is much higher. It can be as high as for people who have so-called MIS-C, multi-system inflammatory disease, as high as 50%, much more serious disease. But I think it's the sin of omission versus the sin of commission. I think the sin of commission is seen as greater than the sin of omission, which is ridiculous because they're both bad. It's a matter of relative risk is what it should be, but it's not perceived that way. If I give my child a vaccine and they have a negative consequence, that's seen as different than not doing anything and having them get sick is just seen as like, bad luck.
Right. Yeah, you're right. It because it's seen as like, I'm making an active choice, as if my personal agency is the only thing that influences the world or my circumstances. Sometimes, things just happen to us, yes, but there are choices we can make to make those things that happen to us less likely to happen. For one really interesting case as well is just how throughout history there's always been a kind of a tendency to look back at incidents where there, sort of bad outcomes, like, for example, the polio, some of the polio complications in an initial batch, like way early on in the polio vaccination campaigns, or when a particular batch of smallpox smallpox vaccination goes bad. So in the early days of inoculation, sometimes it would develop into full-blown smallpox. And so people look at those cases and say, well, here I can show that something bad has actually happened when I've gone and made that choice. The difference between the active choice and then an event you can point to, or an active choice and event you can't really point to. Something that's more that could have been chance or could have been incidents.
Yeah, the one thing that I lived through this, I'm fortunate enough to be part of a team at Children's Hospital Philadelphia that invented the rotavirus vaccine, Rototec. But there was a vaccine that preceded ours that came onto the market in 1998 called RotaShield. And it was found to be a rare cause of intussusception, which is intestinal blockage, where the intestine sort of folds in on itself, gets stuck, and then there's a decreased blood supply, and so there can be bleeding, which can be fatal, and then there's often an entrance of bacteria into the bloodstream, causing sepsis, which also can be fatal. So it was rare. It was about 1 in 30,000 babies who got that vaccine had intussusception, and there was at least one death associated with that. And so it was taken off the market. And when I was on the advisory committee for immunization practice, I got up in front of that group and tried to make a case for it, because you were still, even in the United States, 5 to 10 times more likely to die of rotavirus than to die from a rotavirus vaccine. So on balance, the benefits outweighed the risk. But there was a risk, and it was a serious risk. And what ended up happening is that vaccine came off the market here. And the virus in the United States kills about 60 children a year before the vaccine. But in the world, it would kill 2,000 children a day. I mean, there'd be 500,000 deaths a year from that virus. And so the World Health Organization, to their credit, tried to save that vaccine. And so I actually went to this meeting in Geneva in 2000, like in February of 2000. And country after country stood up and said, look, if it's not safe for America's children, it's not safe for our children, even though the risk-benefit ratio was dramatically different in those countries where children would routinely die. And so, therefore, there wasn't another rotavirus vaccine for 7 years because of that. And do the math, 7 years of 2,000 children dying a day, because those countries believe that that our notion of safety should be exactly the same as theirs, when the benefit risk ratios were even worse. But I would even argue that even in our country, the benefits outweighed the risks. But that was just nobody wanted to hear that, because it had a side effect that was serious, and that was the end of it.
Yeah, and so they just sort of focus on that negative aspect that they can point to. So my uncle in law was a guy named Frank Fenner, Dr. Frank Fenner. He led the last eradication program of smallpox, and was the one who got up in front of the WHO in the 1970s and announced it to the world that we had finally eradicated smallpox. Now, smallpox vaccination, I think, continued for a little while after that, but eventually, once we were, everyone was confident that it was finally gone from the earth, vaccination was able to stop, because, of course, there are risks to even to smallpox vaccination. They're very small, but those risks do exist. But then smallpox, like, people don't remember what a scourge to humanity smallpox was, because and that it's gone from the earth because of vaccines. Like, it would still be killing millions and millions of people. We all too often forget these things, these diseases that used to absolutely terrorize us and used to kill so many people. We've, now that they're kind of in the background or out of the picture, or they're a problem for developing countries. Our first world countries, we don't really care.
Although I was on the advisory committee for immunization practice in 2000, when the George W. Bush administration wanted us to give smallpox vaccine to all frontline responders, because the fear was that it would be used as a weapon of bioterror by agents in the Middle East because we were about to enter into a war with Iraq. And I think, and I voted against that. I was sort of the only person that voted against immunizing frontline responders because there was hadn't been a case of smallpox like in the world, so for decades. And why were we giving this vaccine, which did have side effects like myocarditis, inflammation of the heart muscle, or pericarditis, inflammation of the membrane around the heart. And and so I argued against it because you can also give that vaccine post-exposure. So post-exposure prophylaxis works because it's a long incubation period disease. And so I said, why don't we just wait till there's at least one case somewhere on the face of the earth before we do this? Because this is a vaccine that has side effects. And it was a short-lived program. Maybe we vaccinated about 40,000 people in the United States, but I think it wasn't the right thing to do because it's always a matter of risk benefit. And if the benefit's not clear, then the risks become more marked.
Yeah. I could talk with you like for forever, but I think I better get to the questions from subscribers. Otherwise, they will all be upset with me. I will start with this obscure little event you might have heard happen in the United States recently. I think it was called the U.S. presidential election.
I read it. Yeah.
I think a few people might know about it, but Jack Cooper, who's the host of History versus Hollywood podcast, a really good podcast. He asks, is it too soon to ask what you think of RFK Jr. having a role in the next administration?
Well, it sounds like he will play a role. I mean, Donald Trump has said, that he will have a role. I'm going to quote Donald Trump, I'm going to let him go crazy on public health. These are not phrases you usually see in the same sentence, public health and crazy, but that's what he said. RFK Jr. has stepped forward and said, I will have a role. It's not clear exactly what that role will be, but it is a frightening thought. I mean, here's a man who's a science denialist, a conspiracy theorist, an anti-vaccine activist who will have any kind of role supervising public health agencies like the Food and Drug Administration or the National Institutes of Health or the CDC is a frightening thought. Do you really want a science denialist in any sense involved with science-based agencies? No. So he worries me. He talks about taking fluoride out of the water, which is one of our best public health achievements. He talks about, wanting to eliminate whole sections in the Food and Drug Administration, which he feels are unduly influenced by the industry. And he's an agent of chaos. And I think that's what will happen. So it's not too soon, but he hasn't really declared exactly what he's going to do or how he's going to do it. We'll find out after January.
Yeah, it is. You're absolutely right. That term, an agent of chaos, he really is. And yeah, it worries me too. Even being in Australia, the term that they say about the stock market when the US sneezes, the world catches a cold. It might be much more literal in this case. So I've got another question for you. Fig asks, how do we combat misinformation and pseudoscience, the kind of things that RFK would bring into a federal level? How do we make science appeal to people who think, say, magic crystals are a thing?
Right. It's hard. I think the misinformation and disinformation is far more lucrative than the information business. But all you can do is the best you can do. Try and make it clear that the damage that's being done. Try and make it clear. Make science fun and exciting and interesting and understandable and palatable. Tell a story. And just keep putting it out there, doing the kind of thing that you're doing. And the number of groups in the United States do, Science-Based Medicine, Skeptical Raptor, Voices for Vaccine, I think our Vaccine Education Center, just to keep pounding out good information. For the most part, the media is generally responsible, and that they, at least mainstream media, that they go to real experts for advice often, but they also often like conflict because that sells. And so that's what you're always up against. I mean, I've been asked now 3 times to debate RFK Jr. and I don't do it because I think all it does is elevate him. 5 minutes into the discussion, people remember the fight far more than the facts. They don't know who the expert is. I mean, you might as well debate whether or not birds are real.
There is a subreddit community that's all about how birds aren't real. Thankfully it is a joke. At least most of them, I'm pretty sure, know it's a joke. There's another one that's all about how New Zealand is not a real place. I quite like that one as an Australian. I don't believe in New Zealand. Thomas asks, okay, so he's got a very long question. I'll try to summarize it. When there's tools and methods for discerning truth, things like Carl Sagan's Benoloni detection kit, when those things fall short, especially, I guess, with adults who lack some scientific literacy, what's, I guess, is there a productive way to communicate critically with them about things like vaccines?
I think in the end, I'm trying to find a nice way to say this. In the end, you do have to trust the real experts. I mean, I'll give you an example. So when the chickenpox vaccine first came into use in the United States, it was 1995. I had a number of people who called me who said, I've done my research and I don't want to get this vaccine. But what that meant was, by research, is they looked at people's opinions on the internet. That's what they meant by research. If you really want to do your research on the chickenpox vaccine at that time, you should have read the roughly 300 articles that were published on the vaccine, which would have meant you would have had to have had an expertise in immunology, virology, epidemiology, statistics, which few people have, and frankly, few doctors have. Mm-hmm. So what you do is you look to expert bodies like the FDA Vaccine Advisory Committee or the CDC Vaccine Advisory Committee, which at least collectively have that expertise and have read those papers and have generally given us good advice. But that is not a message that sells in the 21st century. Trust us, we're experts. People believe they're experts because they have internet access. And that's what you're up against. You people that they don't really know enough to really determine whether they should get the vaccine. I mean, I'm on the FDA Vaccine Advisory Committee. In December of 2020, we got about 400 pages to read on the Pfizer vaccine before we recommended authorization on December 10th, and another 400 pages on December 17th for the Pfizer vaccine, for the Moderna vaccine. It was 800 pages we read in that few-week period, and I read every word. We all did, because you want to make sure you get it right. And I think I was an informed citizen. I think that when that vaccine was offered to me about a month later, I couldn't wait to get it. I was an informed consumer because I'd read the 800 pages. Most people didn't, even though you could have. I mean, it was all online, but
they made it all open access as well, which was amazing, actually. That was because I was excited to get it as well, because I thought, this is cool, this mRNA technology. I thought it was the coolest thing. I remember there were two lines. There was a line for AstraZeneca, which I think was the adenovirus vector, and then there was the line for the mRNA version. And at the time, this was just after some news reports had come out about AstraZeneca having a connection with, heart inflammation and all that kind of stuff. And nobody was in the AstraZeneca line. Everyone was in the mRNA line, but I was there merely because I'd always been planning to be there, and I was excited just to get this, see if I could get superpowers from the mRNA vaccine. I didn't get any superpowers. Information, whether or not they're true, it can really, swing people in massive ways.
The adenovirus vector vaccines did have a rare side effect of clotting, including clotting in the brain, and it was rare, very rare, but any clotting was like in 1 to 200,000. But it was real, and it ultimately drove the vaccine off the market in the United States because the mRNA vaccine was safer. And yet there were systems in place to pick that up, because the Vaccine Safety Data Link or the vSafe system can pick that up fairly quickly, because pre-licensure studies are never going to be able to pick up very, very rare adverse events. You have to have those systems in place, and they were in place. And so I think, but you have to know that. I mean, medical innovations are always at some level associated with a human price for knowledge. That's always true.
The last question for you is from Rafael, and he's from Brazil, and he is wondering whether being an anti-vaxxer is a luxury first world kind of opinion to hold, whether it's kind of a privileged opinion to hold. For him being in Brazil, he sees a lot of viruses and infections and things that aren't very common anymore in my country and in yours. So he's wondering, do you see that as kind of a privileged kind of first worldish kind of belief.
Yes, it is. And also, you get to hide in the herd. I mean, most people are vaccinated. Most children are vaccinated. And so, incidence of measles is certainly way down from where it was in the early 60s. And same thing with German measles, essentially gone. So, yeah, you hide in the herd. It's completely selfish. It's unfair. And if enough people make that decision, as is starting to happen with measles and with pertussis and even with flu, you're starting to see those diseases sort of come roaring back. So that's the problem. Yeah.
Absolutely. Also, I could go on with you for forever, but I think I will let you have your time back. Thank you again so much for coming on and having a chat with me. I hope we can do this again at some point in the future. I think that would be awesome. Next time you have a book, let me know. I think I've been reading through your entire back catalog, and it's fantastic. So thank you again so much, Dr. Offit, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and week, and hopefully a good next 4 years.
All right, Nicholas, my pleasure.
All
Hopefully, we
right,
get to do this again.
thank you, sir. Thank you so
Bye
much.
bye.